This is one of the weirdest things that I've seen throughout my career as a silversmith. As I was heating this, one of the metals passed right through the other metal, just entered SV cheats 1 and then no-clipped right through. This was supposed to be something called a bezel setting, and it usually looks like this. I actually have a whole video on this topic, co-starring Jeff Bezos' dumb bald head, but the short of it is that you take a thin strip of pure silver, bend it into the outline of the stone, and then solder it to a sheet of metal. To do that, you normally just heat it from underneath like this with a torch until eventually the solder melts and then wicks into that tiny seam between the two metals. But because I was doing this in front of an audience, that is of course when things are going to go wrong. Now, I've heard several theories about why this happened, but personally, I'm going to go with Occam's razor here, and assume it has to do with the melting point of each metal. Now, on paper, it would seem as though the melting point between those two metals is only 10 degrees Fahrenheit apart. But that's not the whole story, because while metals like fine silver, which are comprised of one element, have one melting point, alloy metals that are comprised of two elements actually have two stages that we call the liquidus and the solidus stage. Now, to vastly oversimplify, the solidus stage is the highest temperature at which the metal is still solid. Anything past that, it starts to liquefy. Whereas the liquidus stage is the point in which the metal is completely molten. That means that for alloy metals like cartridge brass, there's actually this weird temperature range between those 2 points, where the metal is molten in some areas, but overall still solid. Here's a good example. This is sterling silver, an alloy of copper and silver. Notice how it doesn't melt all at once. This can be deceptive during casting, because while the top is liquid, the bottom is a mass of a semi-liquid sludge. So you have to kind of poke and prod at it with a graphite rod. Now, at first, it will feel like you're jabbing a stick into mud, but once it reaches that liquid stage, it'll feel like you're stirring a, very heavy liquid, if that makes sense. Now, cartridge brass begins to pass that solidus stage around 1680 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it will completely melt at around 1750 degrees Fahrenheit. Whereas pure silver will only melt at around 1762 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm fairly certain what happened is I managed to hit that sweet spot where the brass was starting to melt and the silver just dropped right through. Unforeseen circumstances like this are exactly why I do a lot of prep work when I do classroom demonstrations. The other reason is because I don't want to waste class time by, sitting around twiddling our thumbs, so I'll have every step of the process completed ahead of time so I can just kind of like pull it out like a cooking show that you'd see on TV. Assuming those are still on TV, I don't know. I've been terminally online since I was a teenager, so I haven't watched normie TV since like 2006. This approach actually saved me once when I was getting my master's degree. You see, we had to do a mock teaching demonstration, and I chose bezel settings as my topic because, well, I can make these things in my sleep. So during the class, everything was going perfectly fine until we got to this step right here. And someone asked me a somewhat complex question, and because they didn't have the background metalsmithing knowledge that I had to kind of like back up a bit so I can unpack what they were trying to ask and like give them a coherent answer. And I lost concentration and I actually ended up melting the bezel right in front of them. No one noticed, so I quickly scooped it up and threw it in the pickle pot, and then grabbed the one that I made the night beforehand and was like, oh look, it's already done. It was the perfect crime, and now all of you know that I'm a hack fraud.